The restaurant was busy, but one moment would change everything. A young black waitress, barely in her 20s, moved gracefully through the crowd. She'd seen many guests, but tonight was different. Tonight, she'd meet someone who would forever alter her life without even knowing it. At a table in the corner, a billionaire sat watching, his son beside him. The boy, disabled and struggling to find his place in the world, was about to experience something no one saw coming. What happened next shook the foundations of everything. They believed about compassion, injustice, and the invisible boundaries that divide us. What could this seemingly simple act of kindness possibly mean? Keep watching, and you'll discover the moment that changed everything. Jasmine had always dreamed of making a difference, but life didn't always hand you the opportunities you hoped for. Working at the local diner in the heart of the city, she spent long hours on her feet, serving customers who barely noticed her. At 23, she was still figuring out her place in a world that sometimes felt like it didn't care. Her parents, immigrants who had struggled to make a living, always told her to keep her head down, work hard, and one day things would get better. But Jasmine couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing, a deeper purpose, a chance to show the world who she really was. Every day she smiled through the exhaustion, pushing the weight of her dreams aside to get by. But tonight something would change. As she walked to her station, she noticed the man in the corner booth. A well-dressed figure, a man of obvious wealth, sitting with his young son. The boy looked like he didn't quite belong in the world around. Him, his wheelchair, his quiet presence, and the way he seemed so disconnected from the noise around him made it hard to ignore. Jasmine noticed him immediately, but didn't think much of it. She had her job to do, and the clock was ticking. But what she didn't know was that the moment their eyes met would set off a chain of events that would challenge her view of the world, her worth, and the invisible barriers that had always held her back. Would she stand by and do nothing, or would she be the one to change everything? Jasmine's shift had started like any other, steady, predictable, and filled with small moments of unnoticed kindness. But then came the moment she'd never expected. As she approached the billionaire's table to take their order, she caught the eye of his son. His gaze was soft, but there was a sadness in his eyes that mirrored her own. The boy's gaze held hers for a second longer than usual, and there was a silent understanding between them. Jasmine quickly looked away, not wanting to make it awkward, but the moment lingered, heavy in the air. As she took their order, the billionaire barely glanced at her, his tone curt as he rattled off his son's preferences. It was as if she were invisible, a part of the scenery he'd chosen to ignore. The silence that followed felt suffocating, and Jasmine quickly turned to leave, but something made her stop. She could feel the boy's eyes on her again. There was a subtle tension in the air, as though the weight of his silence was pleading for something. Understanding, empathy, perhaps even a connection. Without thinking, Jasmine bent down, a rare act of kindness in a world that often overlooked her. "You're doing okay?" she asked softly, meeting the boy's eyes again. The father didn't seem to notice, still absorbed in his phone. The boy's lips trembled slightly as he looked back at her, but he nodded, though the movement felt empty, hollow. Jasmine smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. She had seen that look before, in her own reflection. She turned to leave, but before she could reach the kitchen, a sharp voice sliced through the air. "Jasmine, can you come here for a minute?" It was her manager, Carla. The way she said her name made Jasmine freeze. Something wasn't right. Slowly, she walked back, her mind racing with the sudden feeling of dread that had begun to creep up her spine. Carla's eyes were cold, almost calculating, and there was a slight hesitation in her voice as she spoke. "I need you to stay away from that table. You're getting too close to the customers." Jasmine blinked, confusion bubbling in her chest. "What? I was just making sure the boy was all right." Carla's expression hardened. You're not here to play therapist. Jasmine, focus on your job. That's it. Keep your distance. We can't afford to make the wealthy customers uncomfortable. The words hit Jasmine like a slap in the face, but she swallowed her anger. This was a part of her life she had accepted, the constant invisible line between the haves and the have-nots. The rich, the ones who could afford to ignore her, while people like her were expected to stay invisible, serving, cleaning, and pretending to be content with their place. But the look in the boy's eyes, the silent plea that still echoed in her mind, refused to be silenced. She wanted to fight back, to say something, but what would it change? Would it make her lose her job? Would she ever be seen as anything more than what everyone expected her to be? A nameless face, a body to serve drinks and clear plates? That night, as Jasmine walked back to the kitchen, she saw the boy again. This time he was trying to lift his hand, making an effort to dance, to do something that most of us take for granted. He was struggling, his movements slow and heavy, but he tried, reaching for something Jasmine couldn't even name. She stood frozen, her heart pounding in her chest as her mind raced. The father didn't notice, but Jasmine saw the boy, struggling, fighting for something he wasn't supposed to have: joy, freedom, dignity. Without thinking, Jasmine reached out. Her fingers brushed against his, and in that moment, everything shifted. But the second her hand made contact, she saw Carla's glare. She saw the other customers watching. She knew this moment would change everything. But would she be brave enough to face what was coming? Or would the world push her back into silence? The tension in the air was suffocating. Jasmine could feel her heart pounding as she stood beside the boy, her hand still lingering in his, the soft warmth of his fingers barely touching hers. For a moment, the world around them faded. All she could see was the quiet desperation in his eyes, the effort it took for him to reach out, to try. But then the moment shattered. Carla stormed over, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. "Jasmine, what the hell are you doing?" Her voice was a whip, cold and sharp. Jasmine pulled her hand away, but it was too late. The damage had already been done. The billionaire father's eyes narrowed as he stood up, the disdain in his gaze unmistakable. "Excuse me," the man said, his voice clipped. "I will not tolerate this kind of behavior in my establishment. Who do you think you are?" Jasmine's chest tightened, her throat constricting as she struggled to find her voice. She had never felt so small, so invisible, as she did in that moment. The boy's hopeful expression now looked like a dream slipping away. Carla stood behind her, silent but clearly disapproving, her arms crossed in that all-too-familiar stance of judgment. Jasmine started, her voice trembling. "I was just trying to help him." He's fine," the man snapped, cutting her off. "He doesn't need your pity. You're a server, not a nurse. Stay in your lane." Jasmine's entire body trembled with a mixture of anger and humiliation. The words hit her like a slap in the face, echoing the harsh truth she had tried so hard to ignore. The truth that people like her were meant to stay invisible, to remain beneath the surface while the world above them continued to look the other way. The boy's face was blank, but his eyes, they still held that silent plea. Jasmine wanted to shout, to scream at the injustice, but all that came out was a choked sob. "Get back to work," Carla ordered, her voice cold as ice. Jasmine stood there frozen, as the reality of the moment hit her. She wasn't just invisible to the rich man. She was invisible to the world. But that silence, that crushing weight, sparked something deep inside her. A fire, a determination that would not be extinguished. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Jasmine's shift ended, but she couldn't shake the heaviness that had settled in her chest. The sting of the billionaire's words still echoed in her mind, and the boy's silent plea replayed over and over. As she wiped down tables in the back of the diner, Her mind raced. She had let the moment slip by. She hadn't stood up for what was right, not the way she should have. But now, she knew something had to change. The next day, Jasmine walked into the diner with a new fire burning inside her. She wasn't going to let herself be invisible anymore. When she passed the same table where the billionaire had sat, she looked straight at the boy. This time, she didn't look away. She smiled, genuinely, warmly. The boy smiled back, his face lighting up, just for a moment. That small, quiet moment of connection was everything. It was a reminder that we are all more than the roles we play, more than the assumptions others place on us. And as for Jasmine, that small act of defiance sparked something inside her. A realization that standing up for others, especially when it's hard, especially when the world tells you to stay silent, is what truly matters. The system, the barriers, the invisible lines that separate us, they may never disappear overnight. But every time we choose to speak, to act with kindness, to see the humanity in each other, we push back against it. In a world that often ignores the invisible struggles of people like Jasmine and the boy, it takes courage to be the one who notices. But when we refuse to stay silent, when we refuse to be invisible, we create ripples of change, ripples that can turn into waves. What will you do when you see injustice? Will you stay silent, or will you make sure the world sees the truth? It starts with one small act. Will you take that step?